Okay, hi everybody. We're going to do this again this week where we go through some slides. Um, this week we're reading the third meditation in Descartes' Meditations, which concerns his proof for the existence of God. So I'm just going to walk you through the proof that's in the meditation. There's a lot more stuff in there than what I'm going to go over, so I encourage you to pay close attention to the reading. But the proof itself is kind of spaced out over several pages, and it can be a little hard to follow. So I thought I'd break it down a little bit um, so that you can be on the lookout and notice what's happening. And also you'll see, the main tenets or the main propositions that Descartes puts forward that, he takes as evidence for the proof of God. So, without further ado, let's move on to that proof. Okay? Okay. So, Descartes begins his proof by remembering from last time that he is certain of only one thing. That is, that he knows that he exists. How does he know? Well, he says, I know that I exist because I can perceive myself clearly and distinctly. That is, I have an idea in my mind of me, I, right? The I, the ego, and it's clear and it's distinct. So what does that mean? Well, there's no way for him to doubt that he exists. If you remember from last week, right, the claim was, if I'm doubting, then there must be something doing the doubting, right? Namely, I. Right? So it's impossible to doubt that I exist. So I have a clear and distinct idea of me, right? And what I am is a thinking thing, right? So then he asks himself, is it possible that everything that I perceive clearly and distinctly is true? Like, does that hold without exception? Well, he remembers that he perceives the truths of math clearly and distinctly, right? He understands that 2 plus 3 equals 5, and that's clear and distinct, and he understands how it works perfectly, right? It's impossible to doubt that 2 plus 3 equals 5, whether you're in a dream or whether you're awake. It's always true. He understands every facet of it. However, he was able to doubt it because it's possible that he's making a mistake. So why was it possible that he was making a mistake? Well, because he posited that it's possible that there's an evil demon that's always deceiving him anytime he does math. So it's possible that he's making a mistake every time he says 2 plus 3 is 5. However, if there is no evil demon, then there's no exception to the rule that everything I perceive clearly and distinctly is true, right? So he's got to prove that there is no evil demon in order to preserve his principle of clearness and distinctness. So how does he do that? Well, he says, if I can prove that God exists and that God is good, then God would not allow for the existence of an evil demon. That is, God wouldn't allow for me to be deceived, right? If God exists and is perfect and is infinite and is all powerful and is all good, then he would never allow for the existence of an evil demon. So he says, okay, if I can prove that God exists, then I've got this principle for truth. Namely, if I can perceive it clearly and distinctly, then it's true, right? And we can give up this project of hyperbolic doubt, where we've been doubting the existence of tables and the existence of the external world and the existence of the room that we're in, right? Or the existence of my past or the existence of other people, right? So he says, if I can just prove that what I perceive clearly and distinctly is true, then we can give up the doubting, right? And I can know that certain things are true, right? So he says, I've got to prove God in order to get that principle. So he sets out to do that. So in order to do that, he's got to start from somewhere. Where does he start? Well, he knows that he is a thinking thing. And he knows all the only things that he can be certain of that exist right now, right, are his thoughts, right? He says, I know that I exist, and I know that I think, and so my thoughts must exist. They might only exist in my own mind. They might not refer to anything in the external world, but my thoughts exist, right? So he says, so what kinds of thoughts are there? Well, he says there are 3 kinds of thoughts. First of all, there are ideas, right? So ideas are like things, right? I have an idea of my phone sitting on the table next to the computer right now. And I have an idea of the door that I can turn over and look at, right? And I have an idea of God, and I have an idea of my mother, right? So ideas are things in my mind, right? They're like nouns. They're things, right? Next, there are volitions or affections, okay? Volitions are like I will myself to go and look at the door, right? They're acts of me, right? So they're acts of the will, right? Affections are like feelings, right? I'm hungry, I'm sad, I'm hot, I'm cold, okay? That's another kind of idea, or another kind of thought, sorry, for Descartes. And then finally, there are judgments, right? So a judgment is different than a volition, an affection, or an idea, right? Because our judgments are about those other kinds of thoughts, right? So a judgment would say, I judge that there is this phone on the table, right? There is a phone, right? That's different than just the idea of a phone. So he notes that of these three kinds of thoughts, only judgments could be true or false, right? An idea can't be true or false, right? I have an idea of God. Is that true or false? The idea itself? Not really, right? Is the idea of a pen true or false? No, it's just a thing. It's just an idea, right? A volition, can it be true or false? I will myself to walk over to the door. Can that be true or false? Not really. An affection, I'm hungry. Is there truth content to that? Not really, right? But a judgment, which could be about those other things, could be true or false, right? So I could say, I judge that I am hungry, right? I might not really be hungry, but I might think I'm hungry or something, right? And so that would be true. I judge that there's a phone on the table next to me, right? There is a phone on the table next to me, right? That would suggest, that could be true or false, right? It might not be true that there's a phone next to me. So judgments can be true or false. Now, we move from there, right? Noting that only judgments can be true or false, right? So I have the judgment there is a God, right? And we wonder what are my judgments about? Well, they're about ideas. So what kinds of ideas are there? Well, he says there are three kinds of ideas, right? There are adventitious ideas. These are just ideas that happen to me, right? I don't know where they come from. I don't create them, or I don't think that I create them, right? They just happen to me. I'm hungry. Where did that happen? Where did that come from? I don't know, right? There are innate ideas, right? Those that are just in me to begin with. And there are factitious ideas. And factitious is weird, right? It's better to think of this as fictitious. He means I make them up. They come from me, right? So the idea of a six-legged horse, right? I just make that up. So that's a factitious idea for Descartes. Again, think of it as fictitious. That makes more sense. Okay, so from this, right, we get a two-part question. Where do my innate and adventitious ideas come from, right? It seems that I am the producer of my fictitious ideas. They come from me, but innate and adventitious ideas, I don't have a clear and distinct idea of where they come from, right? So they must come from somewhere. So we've got to figure out where they come from, right? The idea of God, for instance, right? That's where he's going. So that's one question. What causes me to have these ideas? And then secondly, why do I think that they come from something outside of me? Why do I think that my idea of the phone resembles an actual phone out there in the world, right? Do I make that up? Is that a mistake I'm making? Or is there some other reason that I think that? So in order to keep going here, Descartes posits a rule, right? A rule of conservation, right? And you might want to keep in mind, you might want to ask if he's warranted in doing this, right? I'm not going to cover it, but you might have to, you might want to think about this. So anyway, the rule is this. An effect cannot have more reality than its cause, right? So if my adventitious and innate ideas are effects of something, then whatever causes them has to be as real as those ideas, right? I know that those ideas are real because I can think about them, right? So whatever causes them has to be just as real as the ideas, right? So again, you might wonder whether or not he's warranted in making this kind of move, but it's a pretty simple idea, right? The move is something similar to saying, right, you can't build a statue that weighs 3,000 pounds out of a stone that only weighs 2,000 pounds, right? The statue, right, the effect has to be caused by a stone, right, that has at least as much stone in it as the statue, right? So the cause of the statue, the stone, has to weigh as much, at least, as the statue, right? So similarly, yeah, the effect, the idea has to have as much, or sorry, the effect can't have more reality than the cause, right? So the cause of my idea must be just as real as my idea. And I know that my idea is real, right? So anyway, you might wonder if he's warranted in making that assumption. This seems like a point where he's just pulling this rule up, not really sure where it's coming from. So you might wonder why he does that. Right. So now he's got this principle of conservation, right? That any idea can't have more reality than whatever causes that idea, right? So in order to prove God exists, right, he moves on to say that the cause of the idea of God, right, must have as much reality as the idea of God. And what's the idea of God? Well, God is an infinite substance. An infinite substance, right? So whatever caused it must be infinite, right? It must have as much reality as the idea, right? So only an infinite being, right? Only an infinite substance could cause the idea of an infinite substance. So only God could cause the idea of God. I couldn't have made it up. I couldn't have created it, right? So if I have the idea of God, the idea of an infinite being, then whatever caused it must also be infinite, right? So there must be some infinite substance out there, namely a God, right, that causes my idea of an infinite substance, right? So if I have the idea of God, then God must exist. And I do have the idea of God, so God must exist, right? This, again, is just sort of the bare bones of the thing, right? He goes into a lot more detail about how this move works, right? Specifically, some different features of infinity, right? One of the reasons that he thinks that the idea of infinite substance can't have come from me, right, is because I don't have any kind of infinite experience, right? What I know seems to sort of be a product of adding together different experiences, right? So I have one experience and then another experience and then another experience and then another experience, right? And so you might think, well, maybe my idea of infinity is just adding up, infinitely all the possible experiences I could have. Maybe that's where it comes from. And he says that's not really how infinity works, right? Infinity already has to include all possibilities. So I have that idea. I understand that infinity would already have to include all possibilities, but I've never encountered all possibilities, right? So something else that has encountered all possibilities must have put that idea in. So anyway, God must exist, and God is infinite and perfect, right? Infinity includes perfection, he says. Perfection includes goodness. So God could not possibly deceive me. Therefore, there is no evil demon. Therefore, the principle of clearness distincts hold generally, and I can now justify any knowledge. Anything is true if I perceive it clearly and distinctly. So he thinks that this is going to give him back the external world, and he thinks that this is going to give him back the truths of math. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions, as always. Send me an email. We can chat over Skype, whatever you like. Yeah, I hope these are helpful videos. Please let me know. Cheers.